Okay, it's on.
Got it. Let me close down all my little tabs. Awesome. Hello, good morning. So hello, Blue Guardians, anybody that's watching right now or later if this is the recording. I'm here today with Ilsé Strauss, lovely lady. Yes, I know I have to say that because she's here with me now. But you may have seen a video I popped up earlier. We had a chat earlier on in the year about lots of things, about the state of Australia and the world at the time, and how that was impacting all of us. I got to know Ilsé a few years ago now, I think.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I've been to some of her amazing day seminars, talks, all about running business, being a leader, knowing your worth, their worth, what they need. So much. There's so much to this. Ethics, values, so much. And I liked it. I was really interested in that. And we've stayed in touch ever since. I've loved all the things she's done. And I
that
thought,
was quite a while ago, wasn't it?
It was quite a few years ago now. So probably the start of Blue Guardian. So that's been 5 years I've been officially running.
Yeah.
And doing lots of kind of learning and stuff all the way. But your take on, or your element to this, there's so much that you provide, but the particular part we'll talk about today is ethics and values and being a good true leader, really, to your people and to everybody else and to yourself, and how that impacts the troops. So sorry, I'll stop talking. So let me introduce Ilsé Strauss. Ilsé, if you could say hello to everybody and just let everybody know a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into doing what you do now and what you do now would be wonderful.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you for having me here. For a start, like, it's really wonderful to come and speak with organizations that are so significant. Like, you were doing such a phenomenal job in supporting people who are out there on the front lines working with society, and I just think I take my hat off to you and all of your people first and foremost. So my role, what I do is I do research into leadership, specifically into destructive leadership, and this has kind of come about because I've been working as a management consultant and a leadership development specialist for probably the last 14 years or so. And that's included doing a lot of executive coaching, corporate trainings, and so forth. And my interest in leadership is really how are we developing great organizations, and how are we developing the people within. And when I was coming through my building my management consultancy, probably over the last 10 years particularly, I just started noticing some real patterns emerging, where patterns of, challenges in the organizations that the leader couldn't quite see. So there was almost like a blindness to what the leader could see and couldn't see. And as an outsider coming in, I was noticing some of the challenges within the organizations, and there was some difficulty in kind of making that apparent to leaders, working with leaders to help their teams. And there was also, from that, there was a lot of negative effects from that, people leaving, disgruntled employees and so forth. So kind of the signs of a toxic work culture, okay, for lack of a better term. And so I decided, well, I need to know a little bit more about this, because the information that was available just wasn't kind of hitting the mark. It wasn't giving me, as a consultant or as a trainer, the tools that I needed for that. And that kind of led me down this path of researching into destructive leadership. And the reason why we're talking about ethics in this is because I ended up doing research into dysfunctional leadership behaviors and how that affects people speaking up, specifically how it affects the morality of the content of people's voices. So we all know about speaking up in terms of, maybe asserting yourself in a meeting, or asking for extra work. Those are types of speak up behaviors that are important for all members in an organization to have. However, what happens when people are wanting to speak up about unethical issues, bullying, lying, harassment, toxicity, corruption, some more of the extreme, more tenuous types of problems. And that's what I ended up doing some research on, and it really gave me a very good insight into how workplaces become what I call morally mute, which is silent in relation to important and quite severe ethics issues that we all hold so dear. But when we say all, it's actually not all, where some people hold so dear. And we're just kind of scratching the surface now on this.
We have to mention here, see, just oh my goodness, I've got so many examples of bad. The thing is, I have bad examples that come to mind first, and I'm so sorry, because that shouldn't be the case. That I've had amazing managers in the jobs I've done in the past, amazing managers, and but I have to say, it's not through training. I don't think many people in the roles I've been in anyway have really had management training with, particularly with those points as an element of that training. It just doesn't seem to exist.
You're correct. Yeah, you're correct in some respects. You're correct in the sense that it's not prevalent, meaning that kind of awareness to, well, let's kind of backtrack a little bit. What we're talking about is people within an organization, whether it's leaders or employees or anybody else who are stakeholders to the organization. What is their awareness and education around having contentious conversations, specifically around ethical conversations? Now, when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about what are the behaviors that we agreed is socially acceptable within our group, right? Yeah. And so the ethical behaviors within a group changes from group to group. For example, extreme example, but the mafia has their own form of ethics.
True.
Their own normative conduct, right? Yeah. So what is the ethical behaviors that we're agreeing upon? And all of those stem from our values, okay? So when we say, well, do they have the training for it? Part of it is, do they have the awareness that these conversations are important? Do they have the awareness that these ethical conversations, whether it's, as I mentioned, common misdeeds such as lying or cheating or stealing, theft is a major issue as well. The training is not widely available. It's seen as more of a specialist training, education, consulting that occurs, but it's certainly not readily available.
Crikey, how do you even address this? This is the line on what's deemed ethical, the right values, the right way to deal with a situation, to talk with somebody else, to discuss all these things. Even all of that is very hazy, depending on the tribe, the situation, the organization, the background, the society. Where do you even begin?
Well, this is where leadership is so critical. And it's important from so many perspectives. One is from the perspective of the leader and the leaders themselves. What is the type of environment that we do want to create for our organization? Yeah. So most organizations want to create a high-performing environment. Okay, they want high levels of productivity. They need to achieve KPIs, organizational goals. Sometimes that is as far as many organizations go, or it might be the default where they'll come back to. Whereas in this conversation, what we're saying is, well, yes, that's important, but we can't ignore the fact that leaders need to be having the conversation now, and employees need to be having the conversation with safe leaders, which is, well, can we have a conversation about some of these really significant, important moral issues going on here? And that's a tough conversation to have in most organizations, because it can be like a foreign language, or it can cause an organization and their leaders to go into defensiveness.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like this new form of, it's almost like we've got to build this new sense of sensitivity to moral issues, because when you raise, let's say you're raising an issue, let's say lying, okay, it's a common what's known as a common misdeed: lying, cheating, stealing. Okay, so as kids we're all pretty much raised, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, right? Mind your P's and Q's, say thank you, say please, some of those etiquettes that go along with it. But then when we come into organizations, now imagine you notice someone in a position of power and authority overstepping some of those common misdeed lines, right? It could be you hear them lying about someone else. And these are all tricky situations, absolutely. You hear them lying about someone else, or you see them lying on a report, or you see them, you see some evidence of cheating or stealing, or you get wind of something that might be considered corruption, or you see an employee who is cowering away when they pass a manager, and you suspect, or there might be rumors of sexual harassment. How is someone supposed to deal with that? How? And so from a leadership perspective, a leader has the most power and influence within the organization. As it stands in our current society, a leader still has that, right? Can the balance be shifted? Yes, it could, but still, and very entrenched, the leader has the most amount of power. So good leaders, ethical leaders, responsible leaders, humane leaders, people who are concerned for the welfare of their people, they are going to foster a more open, a more collaborative, a safer, a trusting workplace. Leaders who don't create that kind of work environment will silence people, will mute issues, will dismiss concerns from individuals. And that creates a very psychologically unsafe work environment. And so within my research, one of the things that I did not expect to come up was the willingness and the almost instantaneous disclosure of the mental health issues that people had experienced by working with dysfunctional leaders. So people shared many stories. So I'll take a pause and because I know your mind's going crazy, Fleur.
Part of that is, and wherever you are, whatever subject you're talking about, people want to be heard. You, as an individual, you feel you want to be heard. You just want that best friend or your manager or your colleague or somebody to say, wow, tell me about it, or I'm listening. You know, you need that. The negative impact of not being able to do that, for me at times has been huge. For family has been huge. But let's hear. Okay, what we'll do is we'll end up on a positive, because I'd love to hear, you know, when this goes well and when this is done in such a positive way, the success that can be had. So we'll come back to that at the end. Right now, please, I would love to hear about your research. I know some of the people that gave some that were included in the research. That was really interesting, and what kind of people did you speak to, and what was the overall feedback that you got from them?
So I did a qualitative research project which relies upon having things like such as interviews with individuals, and we do qualitative research when we want to understand the depth of knowledge about, or the depth of insights from the public about a specific issue that's under researched. So where there is, and that's different from quantitative research, which is more statistical, it's survey-like and so forth. Whereas because this interaction between leaders and employees, there's so many, it's so complex. I wanted to understand better the nuances within that relationship. So what happens between the leaders and the employees, or the leaders and the organization, to affect how people speak up? Because we really wanted to understand the impact of voice. So I interviewed people. It was a volunteer sample, so people were able to just say, hey, I'd like to take part in this research. So I didn't go out looking for specific types of people. People would come and say, okay, yep, I'd love to see this, because they would see what my research was about. And it was fascinating, because we ended up having to turn away and stop the recruitment process for it. I think it was after 2 weeks, because I had more people than what we really needed for the project. And so we had people from private and public sectors. We had people from various industries, from education, from cleaning industry, from forces as well, from, this is an Australian-wide sample. So we had various types of people taking part in this. We also had people who were employees, but also executives. So people from various levels of the organisation. So that was absolutely fascinating, because people who were in the executive positions were able to share insights about what happened around the boardroom table. And that was very helpful in terms of putting together some of the pieces of the puzzle. And then we had employees sharing their insights around it. So what we ended up, the way I looked at it was through this theory called moral disengagement. Now, moral disengagement theory was developed by a psychologist named Albert Bandura in mid to late 1900s. So I think about 1960, 1970, some of his initial work started coming out that built into the theory. And so moral disengagement says that when someone's committed an unethical or inhumane act, there's a psychological process that occurs that allows them to disconnect and become oblivious to the immorality of their behavior. So his research looked at quite a number of aspects, but I'll share one example with you. So he originally looked at it in terms of children and children's aggression. And one of the other studies talked about a Nazi commander, a Nazi commandeer. And the story goes, he was sitting in his post, writing a letter to his dying father, a loving, affectionate letter. He looks up and he sees one of their prisoners crossing the yard and not doing their work. He picks up his rifle, he shoots him down dead. He goes back to writing this beautiful, affectionate letter to his father. How does that happen? Another story, executioners. One straps the soon-to-be deceased person down. One administers the death needle, and you have others supervising. How does that happen? So moral disengagement theory says that there's this process that occurs whereby people can disengage from what they've just done, the ethical nature of what they've just done, by morally justifying it as being for the greater good. They can dehumanize people so that they don't even see them as human anymore and just see them as an animal or have an animal nature or just something lesser or maybe even lesser than human. They might diffuse responsibility and say, okay, well, it was, I didn't actually give the lethal injection, I just strapped them down. So there's a wide range of ways in which we can morally disengage from it. So the reason why I'm sharing that is because I think, they're very extreme examples just showing how we can disconnect from our unethical behaviors. But also, I use that theory because I wanted to examine the information that people were sharing with me from a perspective that could look at the psychological aspects of how are leaders disengaging from the unethical things that are occurring within their workplaces, and then disconnecting from people saying, hey, this isn't right. How does that happen? And this theory was one whereby I could further explore that and get a perspective of maybe this is why they're doing it. Maybe they're just disconnected from their morality. And that was kind of the starting point of my research.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find it extremely interesting. I love history and I love learning. This to me is very relevant to the planet right now for many reasons. We can all do better. So I'm not pinpointing anybody or anything or any institution or anything in particular. I just think we can all do better, and it definitely comes down to an individual person at the foremost, at the front of this, and then obviously the leaders can then create this as well. It's you know, we all have our responsibility at different levels.
Yeah, well, there's a saying that is we're all complicit to our own oppression.
Yes.
And you know that it's true in the sense that when we talk about leadership, we're not only talking about the leaders, we're also talking about followers.
Yes.
So every single person has a responsibility to speak up for their own values, right? And whether or not, and when we talk about organizations, it's a different kettle of fish, because an employee has the ability to stay with that organization or not. If you're working with a dysfunctional leader, you have a choice.
Yeah.
It might be a very difficult choice to leave, or it might be a very difficult choice to pursue avenues to hold a leader to account, or at its very least have that conversation. But what does happen when people are speaking up for themselves is it does come with risks.
Yes.
That risk, various risks, but they still have what's called moral efficacy. Moral efficacy is our belief that that our moral behaviors, our ethical behaviors, for example, speaking up and so forth, it will have an effect. So people with a low sense of moral efficacy have lesser belief that their moral values can be acted upon, and if they act upon it, it will have a positive outcome. Whereas people with a high sense of moral efficacy are probably more likely to speak up.
Yeah.
And so these moral behaviors coming from your own moral values. So for example, if an employee has a belief that trust is important, or that welfare is important, these are going to be the things that this employee will notice. These are going to be the things that this employee will want to experience more of in the workplace. And if the workplace doesn't provide this, or isn't open to developing more of a culture around that, then the employee is likely to feel as though they're out of place there. Because our social groupings, the people who we connect with, the people who we do life with and so forth, a lot of that occurs in the 9-to-5 per se job. And so that space in which we are working within as an employee or as a leader, that is going to that we want it to reflect our moral values, because that's what ethics does. Ethics is a way for individuals and society to come together upon normative forms of behavior. We agree that this is how we're going to treat each other. We have this, it's all psychological agreement. Like, we don't sign a contract saying it, but it's an unspoken thing. So you come into a workplace, you have an expectation that this is how things will be. And we need it to be so so we can organize our life within that social group, so we can so we understand how people and so forth move around, or we know what will happen if things get out of line and so forth. And when things get out of line, if that occurs in those unfortunate circumstances where there is something of an unethical nature that needs to be dealt with, one would hope that there is a safe place to go and discuss it and for resolution to occur. And so we really needed to understand what happens when there isn't a safe place for people to land upon. And so there were a lot of specific behaviours that occurred within workplaces that really created what I call a morally mute climate, which is a morally mute climate being a place whereby the way in which ethical decisions are made, the way in which people perceive the ethics of the organisation is one that oppresses employees and others into muting themselves about quite severe ethics issues occurring in the workplace.
An experience that I had, I was on when I first left the military, joined the police in the UK, and I was on gone away for training and done all of that stuff and loved it, great, wonderful, and then got put on what we call the tutor unit, where you basically, you still go away for some lessons, then you come back and you do so many shifts actually doing the job with a more experienced copper, police officer. Again, I was enjoying that, and I was doing well. There was a sergeant on that tutor unit that I could see, thank goodness, I felt like, oh, we get on, it's okay. But for week after week, she would pick a different probationer to pick on. There was one week, literally tore her to shreds for no reason. And I think she left, that probationer left. Then she picked another one, and then another one. And then there was one guy she was picking on, and he was like, shall I stay, shall I go? I'm rubbish, oh my goodness, whatever. There was never any reason to do it. It was just, she caught their eye and decided, you're my next prey. It sounds horrendous, but
it's very predatory.
Oh, behavior. Very much so. Always boasting about her experience and whatever. So we thought she was so experienced, and we should really listen to her and do really well. So because of that, we all wanted to do well and be on her good books. And then she picked on me, and she tore me to shreds, and I couldn't understand why, because the reason she was picking on me, there was no reason, you know, she was making things up. Yeah, just made it up out of the air. I ended up being put on another shift. I ended up being interviewed by the union and by an inspector, and saying, you know, and without them saying it, they were alluding to, you need to tell us what's going on. Later on, I understood. At the time, I was just panic stricken and thinking, I'm not telling anybody anything. I'm just trying to do my job. I need this job. I want to do well. I can't be here for like 6 months and suddenly my career's over. For what? I failed already. It's ridiculous. So it really was. I literally just shut my mouth and I just said, yes, sir, no, sir. It was awful, horrible. In hindsight, I now know, God, I should have spoken up. Really, I really should have done. She did leave tutor unit a few months later. Another job came up, whatever. Would have been some little talks behind the lines kind of thing. But she caused hell for so many people. She may have been a fantastic police officer, but not to be in charge of probationers ever. Yeah. She was awful.
And that's like, you know, it's such a horrible experience. That
I hated myself for it.
But it's all part of learning the space in which we're operating out of, right? So learning that sometimes an organization, even though we want it to be ethical, even though we want it to take care of us, that the world and the workplace is sometimes not that. And I think that's what people struggle with sometimes, is they second guess themselves that, oh, maybe it's just in my head.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, maybe it's in my head.
I'm making a fuss. It's no big deal.
Exactly.
It'll be okay.
Exactly. So individuals can discount their own experiences that is actually harming them in the workplace, because they don't want to rock the boat, or they don't think that they're thinking appropriately about it. So, oh, it's not sexual harassment. Oh, that's just him. That's just him, you know. So we discount it, and then and you can mute yourself for that. So there's a lot of reasons why people don't speak up.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's conditioning. Sometimes, you know, the way in which you've learned to speak, or to address conflict, or to address your own concerns, that may have been suppressed in an individual, you know, in childhood it could be as well. You know, you may not have been taught that it was okay to speak up to authority figures. And therefore you're silent. You learn that silence is the appropriate thing to do. Some people learn that having a dissenting voice is rude.
There's a lot of conditioning here, and not healthy conditioning at all.
Exactly. So all of this is this conversation kind of fits into this broader notion of how do we listen to our own moral instincts,
yeah,
and moral values, and know how to move around the world, specifically in this case we're talking about organizations or your own business and so forth, in a way that is supportive of other people, in a way that takes care of people's welfare, and in a way that is safe for people. So, and that's part of what I'm teaching now, to my students and my clients through Keystone. It's helping them to understand this conversation around, well, what does an organization look like? What does a culture look like? What does a climate look like? What does communication look like in an organization where we prioritize ethics? What does that look like? And that's a really interesting conversation to have, because within doing that, people are coming up against their own challenges around mutism, around silence, around, oh, well, okay, well, what about if what if an employee speaks up to me? That's one of the things that I get defensive about, you know. So it's not just an organizational issue. It's not just a leadership issue. It's also a self-development issue, you know. So it's a very fascinating spectrum of work to be in, because when we're looking at moral psychology is not really something we talk about, is it, Fleur?
No.
Just not generally part and parcel of a leadership seminar or
I did that at school. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
No idea. All of this is you're opening up a huge discussion, which is absolutely fantastic and really promising. And I have worked for amazing leaders in the past. I suspect they didn't necessarily realize that they were strong in their ethics and strong in their values and the organization. I suspect it was more chance than you know, yeah, exactly.
Well, recruitment doesn't recruit for morality.
No.
And high-level leadership appointments or high-level management appointments aren't done based on morality.
Yeah.
It's done based on other factors that is going to drive the organization's revenue forward, or create networks or collaborations or mergers between, like if we look at the corporate world, the appointments are made on those types of quasi-political types of issues. Appointment, or it's made because they just need to fill a seat. There's so many ways that appointments are made to management roles, and ethics is not one of it. So what does that say about what societies or what high-level corporations' values are around who do we have in leadership positions. So yeah, those people who you've worked with in the past that have been great leaders, it's likely that they had a really strong moral compass.
Yes.
In the first place.
Yes.
And those that didn't have a strong moral compass or strong ethical behaviors, it probably wasn't part and parcel of the leadership of management requirements.
Unfortunately, the negative side of this is a really, really unhappy and dysfunctional office space, work organization, whoever we're talking about here, and it could be anybody, could be anything.
Well, much of the ethics issues in organizations, and specifically around moral voice, or the lack thereof moral voice that's allowed to be discussed in the workplace or that's fostered, is because of dysfunctional personalities.
Yeah.
So you've got the dark triad of personalities.
Yeah.
Dark triad is narcissism. So this overinflated sense of grandiosity of the leader. So they will often brag about their accomplishments. They'll design and create an organization whereby people need to constantly edify them and so forth, right? So narcissism is the one. Then you've got corporate psychopathy, which is just a callous individual. Highly strategic mind, callous individual, no empathy. So people will not be cared for. People's welfare will be very low on the list. There is no benevolence whatsoever in that leader at all. Very dangerous person.
People watching this now there'll be people coming to their minds. They'll be able to,
Absolutely.
If it's not them, they'll know someone they work with or have worked with. Exactly. Anybody watching this now, start thinking about this. It's awareness is key, because once you see this,
awareness is key. And the third one in the dark triad is Machiavellianism. So Machiavellianism is a leader who's highly emotionally manipulative. So they have a very high sense of emotional intelligence. They're able to self-regulate their own emotions, and they're able to decipher others' emotions, and they'll use it for their own gain. So, and here's the thing, dysfunctional leaders are very strategic. They're very sharp, very clever and intelligent in different forms of types of manipulation. And that's what when I was saying before, the appointment to leadership roles has nothing to do with ethics, but more to do with things such as networks, sometimes collusion, right? How to merge effectively, how to increase productivity, and other broader organizational goals that serves the financial interests of an organization. Now, when you've got people who have a dysfunctional personality, then they're able to achieve financial interests of the organization, usually at the expense and the absolute destruction of the people who they are supposed to lead. So if they're not leading people, if they're not caring for people, that is not leadership. That is just pure management. And it eventually destroys the entire organization as well. So there's no happy ending for this. So the moral of this, one of the morals of this story is, wherever there is a morally mute climate, there is probably a dysfunctional leader and employees who are too scared to speak up.
Gotcha. Makes absolute sense to me.
And that organization is on a clock for destruction, for imploding, unless major changes occur. So
these last few years, obviously, we've seen small businesses, or some small businesses, really destroyed. We've seen bigger organizations really impacted through lack of staffing, through extra workloads, shift patterns, through so much demand. It's been crazy.
It's been diabolical. Absolutely
Yes.
diabolical. Yeah.
So small businesses, you know, it's hard every day to keep going. The bigger organizations, again, you're hearing in the news, people are leaving in droves.
Yeah.
This will all be an element of that, and to ignore that or to think that's not really part of it is naive.
Well, high levels or attrition is linked to a destructive or just destructive work environment or a dysfunctional leader. That's one of the highly cited reasons why people are leaving organizations in droves.
Yeah.
I think it was, what, 3 years ago, one report came out. I haven't seen any updated reports yet, but one report came out saying one of the main reasons why executives are leaving their corporate roles is because of dysfunctional and unethical practices of senior management. It's a major issue. The Governance Institute of Australia, I think it is, releases a report every year, an ethics report, and it takes the pulse of Australia's ethics, right? And what people think about Australian ethics. And every year, the most widely cited occupations or roles for unethical behavior in the eyes of our society are senior leaders.
Yeah. Senior
leaders, CFOs, CEOs, politicians. There was out of the top 10, 7 were in senior leadership positions. So this was a big wake-up call for me that, hang on a second, I'm in the leadership space, yet why have I not ever seen this, understood it, heard more about this? Why is no one talking about this? Why am I getting, like, I would get calls to come in and, you know, fix a problem or help a leader improve productivity, performance, and I would just be like, this is not what we are only here to do. Because while they were doing that, they were harming. There was things that was occurring and it's harming. And so I eventually refused to stop taking on those jobs anymore. When I got wind and I could see things occurring, I was like, nah, no more. There has to be something. There's something else going on here, and I don't know what the heck it is. The books aren't telling me what it is. I'm not looking in the right place, or the reports there. What is going on here? Moral psychology hasn't been put on the table really in a mainstream way. So people are leaving because they're being treated unfairly, unjustly, they're being abused, they're coming out with mental illnesses. So mental health insurance, I won't go into that too deeply, but take a look at that. You'll see that's increasing. I don't know whether it's because there's more cases or people are reporting it more, the psychological distress that occurs when working for dysfunctional and toxic leaders. And so, and that's why I ended up going and doing this research, because you're right, it is a conversation that needs to be had.
There was a report, I'll find that again for you, to do with sick days. And again, that's gone through the roof, linked with mental health, because it's easier, I'm going sick, rather than have that conversation, which often cannot be had anyway. The majority of the people I ever speak to who are still in the jobs, it's not about the trauma they see, it's not about the incident they had to deal with, or the fire they had to put out, or anything. That is only one tiny small section of the bigger thing. How they're treated by the management is the thing. And incorporating all the things that we've just been discussing. So that's what needs addressing. That's the one.
Exactly. Because I think management don't yet really understand how critical their leadership style is to people's sense of well-being.
And we all need to learn.
Exactly. And so in that as well, you know, people need to learn that they do have a voice, that they can speak up in some way. And it might not be direct to that manager, because that comes, as we spoke about before, with quite negative effects. And the reality is that people aren't taught how to deal with contentious situations. It's not part and parcel of our learning. You know, so my husband and I, we've got 3 children. We create contentious conversations, and we allow our kids to feel it out, and we'll play
like
with
I said,
it.
I'm coming to live with you.
Because
I hate confrontation. Now, considering I was always in the job, I was always the first one in to a fight. I was the first one in there to deal with something. I was happy to put myself on the line, have that hard face-to-face conversation, whatever that was needed, with the victim, with the offender, whoever. But I'm very much, and no excuse, but part of me being me, I've had to really step up, and I'm still learning every day, to stand up for myself and have those conversations. You don't need to have an argument, but you need to say, this isn't right, or that needs doing. Are you sure about that? To do that, you need to have, again, be strong in your values, understand yourself, which we've kind of been taught, you know, intuition, forget that. You need this book, you need this, you know, you need to learn online, you need to do, well, actually, you need to learn yourself first. So yeah, it's kind of relearning all the way I was brought up to yes sir, no sir, of course, don't make a fight, don't make a fuss, you know, it's your fault, it's not theirs. And so that's why I didn't stand up for myself when I got dragged in by the union, you know, whereas now it would be a completely different conversation.
And it's very normal, and people don't like having we don't tend to like conflict, we don't tend to like confrontation.
No.
People who thrive on conflict and confrontation are dysfunctional personalities. Right. So
I'm a lover, not a hater, Ilse.
Right? So I'm not talking about this situation here. You're talking about your learning how you've learned to have that. And so we've all had to learn to do the confrontation. What I'm referring to is, in an organization, leaders who love confrontation, who create these contentious environments, that's a sign of a dysfunctional personality.
And we all know those. I'm sure we can all name some.
So when you've got most of the workforce who does not like who doesn't like, well, this is not statistically proven, but employees aren't working in their roles because they want to go in and fight battles. They're working in their jobs because they're doing their job. Right? And so the makeup between the psychological makeup or the psychological difference between how employees versus leaders deal with conflict situations, well, leaders are probably more trained for it. They're probably more trained, and this is probably not, you know, special forces and so forth, because you guys are more trained to go into tenuous situations than others are. But there's all of these various factors that are playing in to how we deal with it when someone crosses a moral boundary of ours, or breaches a moral boundary, or violates a moral code of ours. And so part and parcel of the education that needs to occur is moral psychology. That's one aspect, one major crucial aspect of the cognitive factors of what it means to influence, develop an organization, create unity within an organization, treat your people well, aka create some form of a harmonious social order within a workplace. Ethics is fundamental to that. Because that's what we're agreeing upon, right? That's what we're agreeing upon. And so when people are there's a high level of attrition, or people are just taking a lot of sick leave, or disengagement occurs within the workplace, if you kind of look to what are people saying or not saying, that gives you an indication as to how people are feeling about their workplace environment. But most leaders don't want to hear that, because it's hard to hear. And many don't think it's important. Now, these are only the dysfunctional leaders. There's many good leaders who are developing these types of organizations that are healthy, that are functional, that are constructive. They are phenomenal leaders, absolutely phenomenal leaders. But in terms of the way forward, we've got to develop that more so that people get used to having conversations of an ethical nature. It's called, when we don't identify or acknowledge the ethical nature of an issue, it's called moral mum. So we're going to stay mum on that matter.
Oh,
yeah. So it was some research done by a gentleman gentleman and his team, I think, over in America. And they found that when people have ethics issues, they don't like to talk about the ethical nature of it. So they'll skirt around it a lot, and then eventually the issue just doesn't get resolved. So they call it being morally mum. We'll just stay mum on that.
great.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, you were going to say something before.
So describe for me, so we're really clear, describe for me what a leader, a manager would look like if they were strong in ethics, values, and good ethical leadership. What would you, how would you describe them? What would they do?
Okay, so this is all speculative and just based on general research, because my research didn't go into what the opposite is. Okay. So I'll give you both sides so we can at least contrast it. Okay. So a leader who creates a morally mute climate will use a lot of manipulative language when someone confronts them with an ethics issue. So they'll either euphemize it, meaning they'll kind of give it another word. So instead of saying, no, that's not bullying, instead of acknowledging that's bullying, they'll say, no, it's just feedback, right? So that's called euphemizing. It uses jargon to desensitize something. They'll also use, moral justifications. We got to hit targets. So no, you need to work this weekend, you need to do overtime, it doesn't matter, things like that. So they'll use a lot of manipulative language. They'll have close networks with HR managers and other people who are responsible for hearing and fielding employee concerns, and they'll block the process.
Oh,
right. So that's procedural injustices, right? So procedural injustice whereby any kind of complaints or concerns are not dealt with fairly. Okay, so manipulative language, they'll block things from escalating or even just being desensitized or diffusing throughout the organization, and they will completely stop any kind of conversation from occurring within the organization about ethics. Okay, so if we looked at some of the broader research around what does ethical communication look like, they will create trust between their teams. Okay, so they'll do things like they will actually have good meetings with their teams. They'll have open door policy. They will, what they say is what they do. So they say what they mean what they say, right? They won't and don't exploit people in their workplaces. So they recognize the human value of individuals, and part and parcel of recognizing the value of individuals is not treating them for their utility value. So just as a number to get through the workday. Instead, where this links back to values, if I can kind of come back to what we chatted about probably about 15 minutes ago, where you said, how important voice is. So they'll recognize that, or they'll learn to recognize that voice is an important way of expressing our values. It's a biological need of ours to express what's important to us, right? It's a way by us being able to also understand our values. So without speaking about our values and what's important to us, we don't get to fully understand what's important to us. Now that's got some important implications for self-development for personal growth, self-actualization, right? If you can block someone from expressing themselves and expressing their values, or at least trying to understand their values and giving them the opportunity to fumble through it until they can get to it, then you're diminishing that person's part of their humanness, right? So mutism has massive consequences for an individual. So they'll recognize the value of the humanity of that person, and they'll also understand how that person fits in to the broader social order within the workplace. So they're creating connections and linkages and being aware of what are the issues going on. So like an ethical leader, any leader that has a style that is more relational, so ethical leadership, responsible leadership, humane leadership, those styles are more humanely based, whereas other forms of leadership, other forms of more contemporary leadership, like hierarchical management styles and so forth, are very much process driven. It's kind of like the antithesis to humane forms of leadership, and humane and relational forms of leadership is what people are crying out for. That's what society is screaming for it. But our leaders aren't equipped for that. They're not being appointed for that reason. They're not being necessarily developed for that purpose, and they're not being supported to be that.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So the life cycle of a leader has a lot of inadequacies in terms of developing leader for a positive, ethically positive, psychologically safe, people, environmentally welfare conscious. We're not doing a good enough job in that. What we are doing is developing leaders that will put more money on the balance sheet at the expense of.
Yes.
So balance sheets are bloody important, but not at the expense of. And that's where my focus has been. What is at the expense of, and why are we not looking at that? So it's developing education and awareness and a lot of support around it. And there will be so leaders that will pursue this pathway, whether it's business owners. I work with executive trainers and coaches and consultants. So I'm teaching them these frameworks and how to develop leaders in this pathway as well.
Wonderful. I've got so much to learn.
A lot of implications again for recruitment and HR managers. Yeah. It is literally an entire. It's a revolutionary way, and it's not my revolution. It's just simply because it's this aspect of our consciousness. It's an aspect of our psychology that has not been given enough airtime.
To ignore this doesn't seem logical to me. Looking after your greatest resource, which is always your people.
Yeah.
Wow, you look after them appropriately, supporting them in all of this in the right way. You will start to hit KPIs and all your ticky boxes, all the things that you need to do to create a successful business organization.
Absolutely.
And this will have streams all the way through, no matter what you're discussing, hitting KPIs. Yeah, we have to look back at this as well and make sure we're doing it the right way.
Yeah, because not only will they have a more productive workforce, because people want to be there, they're happier. And they're not dealing with the distress. So 3 forms of stress: stress, eustress, distress. When working for highly unethical and dysfunctional leaders, people are operating in distress, which it tends to tip into psychological issues, right? So when people are operating in distress, they are not productive. So by not focusing on this and not developing leaders in this way, you're actually kind of predicting you're going to have low well-being, low employee well-being, high levels of attrition, and so forth. But then also the other effects is that if you have more ethical and humane relational forms of leaders, KPIs go up, moral imagination goes up, innovation goes up. You're now succession planning for people who are actually going to building in these new beliefs and values within the organization. The organization becomes strong, like foundationally, psychologically strong, healthy, capable, right? The overflow effects is absolutely massive. And so I see that there'll be there'll be pockets of groups that will start to build their leaders in this way. But I also see that new businesses, well, part of my hope is that we can build new businesses and organizations that can start off in this way. So for new businesses, for new leaders, if you can assist them to understand what some of the moral psychological concepts are, if you can help them understand how it ties in with leadership, meaning how they're developing people, the methods they're using to influence and persuade people. Because when we're talking about communication, my God, the levels of deception and manipulation, exploitative types of language patterns that came up in my research was just astronomical. So leaders tend to be very good communicators for the purpose of influencing, persuading. But there's a lot of deception in how leaders are influencing, persuading, not all, just the highly dysfunctional ones, which is contributing to some of the major challenges that we're having. So cleaning up the language, cleaning up the communication, cleaning up the interactions that are occurring, and a lot of people, a lot of leaders don't necessarily know that they're doing this, Fleur. And that's the thing. They don't understand that they don't necessarily understand that they're doing it because they've been conditioned to. They've been conditioned to use organizational jargon. They've been conditioned to just have your employees get the damn work done. So it's part and parcel of the entire psychological programming that occurs within the organization as well. You might have a highly ethical leader come in, or someone with high levels of moral efficacy and moral courage come in, and they might stay within that organization and become subjected to the type of environment and the type of coaching that occurs from other leaders around them, and they might morph into behaving the same way, or they might jump out and go, this is not for me. So there's a lot of factors at play why someone might adopt these types of morally disengaged ways of communicating. And there's factors in the individual that might make them jump ship and go, no way, I'm not having part of this.
We know how bad it is, but we also now know, you're talking there about how amazing it can be. Yeah. And it seems to be there's a lot of more money being spent now on mental health, on health welfare groups within organizations, which is lovely, wonderful. But my goodness, if we could put that money and time into creating the best leaders, then I guarantee you that the health and welfare of the staff will improve anyway. So they won't necessarily need all these extra assistance. So again, so we know how bad it is. We know how good it could potentially and can really be. How do we get there? What are you doing? So what I'll do is I'll make sure that your website is up here when I'll put this up on my page. What are you doing at the moment? How are you moving forward? Because this is so exciting, and I know you've got so much passion in this. Where are you going next?
Well, so my goal was to then take my research and put it into some kind of practical form for society. And so one of the ways in which I know how to do that, because I came from management consultancy, was to put it into a training program. So I've developed a ethical leadership program. We are now at class 10 of 12. So I've developed a curriculum for ethical leadership. And what I've done in that class is, what I've done in that program is I've educated people around some of the dysfunctions that causes morally mute climates. and within that, given them solutions.
Wow.
So every class we're talking about the contrasts. Okay, this is what it is, because I need people to understand, yes, this is actually for real. This isn't just you, this isn't just your mind making up stories. This isn't you, or as a leader going, no, that doesn't matter. I'm saying, yeah, it does matter. That is a bit of a problem. That ain't good leadership. This is what we've got to do.
We're not doing it that way anymore.
No.
This is what we need to do.
Exactly. So I've developed that program, and then what I'm doing is I'm building a executive coach practitioner program, which will be designed according to the International Coaching Federation's guidelines and standards for executive coaches across the world. So that's a bit of a big project that I'm working on at the moment as well. And so that program will develop ethical executive coaches, okay, who understand, and I'm going to train them in the moral psychological factors that are required and needed by executives and emerging leaders.
Yes.
To do business, to do team development in a positive, ethical, kick butt way.
So then even they can pass this on. That they can, you know, create a good team, and that the team learn from the top anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what you want moving forward. Absolutely.
So lead without doing harm.
Yeah.
That's essentially lead without doing harm.
Yeah.
Hit your targets without doing harm. Wow. You're a leader, so leaders are about developing others. So how are we developing? You can't develop others if people are leaving because of you. You can't develop others if people are leaving because you're not aware of these things, or you don't create an environment where people are willing to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
No, these are responsibilities. So I've taken quite a strong stance on the speak up culture, because I really believe that through communication is how we shift things. And right now we're fighting a big battle. Not just right now, we've been fighting a big battle whereby people can't speak up, don't speak up, won't speak up because they're censored in the workplace. They're fearful of speaking up in the workplace. And so that's the big hairy monster that that we have to deal with first and foremost. And it's teaching all parties about this. It's not just employees, it's not just leaders, it's not just industry associations, it's everybody who is involved in the interests of the organization. And so everyone needs to understand how important communication is. And you know, where we're doing it 8 hours a day in the workplace, but you know what, we're doing it at home as well. Yes. So if we're not practicing good communication at home, and my God, it is tough. It is really tough. But the journey starts with the individual first and foremost. And we've got to give ourselves enough grace, because we need to realize that we are coming out of probably 1,000-year eras of people not knowing how really to speak up in power situations, authoritative situations, domineering situations, whether by design, whether consciously, whether not. But we're learning. So we've got to do it with grace and allow ourselves to kind of stuff it up as we go along. But as long as we're making incy-wincy progresses through it.
It's amazing. It's wonderful. I've loved hearing all about this. Thank you so much, Ilsé. Is there anything else you want? I mean, I want to talk to you more, and if the Blue Guardians want to have you back, I'm sure they will. We will come back with some more questions, with specific questions to maybe discuss. Is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap this up?
Start getting back in touch with your moral self, who you are, who your future self is as a moral being, and opportunities for you to grow in that area. Just start there. it all starts with us individually, first and foremost.
It does. It does. Thank you so much, Ilse. That's perfect words. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's
We
been
will talk to you
lovely.
again very soon.
All right.
Yeah, we'll come back with questions. So Blue Guardian, start typing and letting me know what you thought and what else you want to talk about.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for having me.